I thought his family was just eccentric until I found the old newspaper clipping tucked inside the family Bible. The decision to finally visit David's family felt like a milestone I'd been chasing for years. Anna, 32, had built a life with David, 36, in the bustling, rain-washed corridors of Seattle. We shared a modern condo with a view of the Space Needle, careers we were proud of, my graphic design work for a reputable agency, his coding for a rising tech firm, and a social circle filled with friends who saw us as a stable, dependable couple. Yet, a significant part of him remained shrouded in mystery, locked away in the dense, pine-scented woods of northern Maine. His childhood home was a place he spoke of rarely, and always with a vague, dismissive air. "It's not like here, Anna," he'd say. "It's quiet, isolated. My parents are set in their ways. They don't understand the world outside our town." For 4 years, I'd accepted these explanations. But as we discussed more serious steps, marriage, children, the weight of never having met them became unbearable. My own family, though living across the country in California, was an open book. They'd welcomed David with warm, chaotic dinners and immediate inclusion. The one-sidedness of it all began to feel like a crack in the foundation of our relationship. My requests evolved from gentle suggestions to firm necessities. "David, I need to meet them. I can't move forward with us until I understand where you come from." His resistance was a quiet, stubborn force. He'd sigh, run a hand through his hair, and offer a new variation on an old theme. "They're private people, Anna. It's a long way to go for a weekend that will probably just be awkward for everyone." But after a particularly heartfelt conversation on my birthday, where I confess it made me feel like a secret he was ashamed of, he finally, reluctantly, agreed. The journey itself was a transition from one world to another. The sleek efficiency of the Seattle airport gave way to a smaller, noisier plane, and then a long, silent car rental drive. The vibrant greens of the Pacific Northwest slowly morphed into the darker, more imposing landscape of Maine. The trees seemed to crowd the road, and the towns we passed through grew smaller and more sparse, until we were on a winding, single-lane road covered in a blanket of brown pine needles. The GPS signal grew spotty, and David navigated by memory, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. When the house finally appeared, it was both grand and foreboding, a large, dark-stained A-frame cabin that seemed to grow directly from the forest floor. The clearing around it was neat, but the woods pressed in on all sides, creating a perpetual twilight. As the car engine cut, the silence was absolute and heavy. It was in that quiet that I saw the curtain in an upstairs window twitch. A pale face, gaunt and unsmiling, observed us for a moment before vanishing. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. Before I could even comment, the heavy front door was flung open and David's mother, Eleanor, emerged. She was a tall, slender woman, dressed in a simple, dark dress that seemed from another era. She moved with an unnerving, fluid grace, her feet seeming to barely touch the ground. She ignored David completely and came straight for me, her arms outstretched. "Annabelle," she breathed, her voice a hushed, intense whisper. She used my full name, which I'd always disliked and never used. David didn't do justice. "You're absolutely exquisite." Her hug was shockingly strong, her arms like cold vines around me. She held me at arm's length, her eyes, a pale, watery blue, scanning every detail of my face. "Just perfect," she murmured, more to herself than to me. Her hands were constantly on me, adjusting a strand of my hair, smoothing my collar, gripping my forearm to emphasize a point. It wasn't overtly threatening, but it was possessive, as if she was inspecting a new acquisition. David stood by the car, a silent spectator, a faint, fixed smile on his face that didn't reach his eyes. His father, Robert, appeared in the doorway, a towering, broad-shouldered man with stern, weathered face and deep-set eyes that held no warmth. He offered a grunt that might have been a greeting, and a nod so slight it was almost imperceptible. The interior of the house was a museum of a life lived in seclusion. It was dark, the air thick with the scent of old wood, beeswax, and something else, a faint, sweet, herbal smell that clung to the back of my throat. Heavy, dark furniture crowded the rooms, and the windows were small, allowing only slivers of the fading afternoon light to penetrate the gloom. Dozens of framed photographs covered every surface, but a pattern emerged quickly, one that mirrored what David had previously hinted at. There were numerous pictures of a cherubic, smiling David as a baby and a young boy, his hair blonde and curly. Then, abruptly, around the age of 11 or 12, the photo stopped. There was a complete void, no awkward teenage years, no high school graduation, no college snapshots. The timeline picked up again with a single formal portrait from his university graduation, where he looked somber and much older than his years. When I pointed to a conspicuously empty space on the mantelpiece, asking if a picture had fallen, Eleanor was at my side in an instant. "Oh, his awkward phase," she said with a tight, dismissive wave of her hand. "He hated having his picture taken. You know how boys are. We respected his privacy." Her explanation was too quick, too smooth, and it rang utterly false. Dinner that first night was a tense, surreal affair. Eleanor served a rich, dark stew in a heavy cast-iron pot. She gave David and Robert normal portions, but heaped my plate until the food threatened to spill over the edges. "You need to keep your strength up, Annabelle," she insisted, her eyes gleaming with an unsettling intensity. "A woman's body is a temple, and it needs proper nourishment for the future." The stew was gamey, a flavor I didn't recognize and found unpleasant, but under her unblinking gaze, I felt compelled to eat. David, who was usually articulate and engaged, was reduced to monosyllables, his eyes fixed on his plate. Robert ate in silence, but I could feel his gaze on me, a heavy, assessing pressure. The interrogation began over a dense, sweet walnut cake for dessert. "Do you believe in the sanctity of family, Annabelle?" Eleanor asked, leaning forward, her elbows on the table. "In sticking together, through thick and thin, through any challenge that might arise?" "Of course. Family is important," I said, choosing my words carefully. "And your previous relationships," she pressed, her voice deceptively light. "That young man you were with before David. Michael, was it? Why did it end? Was there a fight? A betrayal? Or did you just give up when things got difficult?" Her gaze was piercing. I gave a vague, polite answer about growing apart and wanting different things. She looked profoundly dissatisfied. "True love requires sacrifice," she stated, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "It requires accepting a person completely, their past, their present, their entire being. You can't run away when you discover things aren't as pristine as you'd hoped. Loyalty is everything." Later, in the small, musty guest room that smelled of mothballs and damp, I tried to connect with David. He was already in bed, his back to me. "Your mom is very intense," I ventured, sitting on the edge of the mattress. "They love you," he said, his voice muffled by the pillow. "They're just showing it in their own way. This is how they are. But the questions, David, they feel invasive. And you're so quiet. You barely said a word all night. Is everything okay? Did I do something wrong?" He turned then, and in the dim light from the hallway, I saw a flash of something raw on his face. Not just irritation, but a deep-seated anxiety, a flicker of fear. It was gone in an instant, replaced by a mask of placid reassurance. "You're overthinking it, Anna. Just go with it. It's only a couple of days. Don't make a big deal out of nothing." The second day was a masterclass in psychological pressure. Eleanor was my shadow. She took me on a tour of the property, which consisted mostly of pointing out various trees and describing, in meticulous detail, how the land had been in the family for generations. Her monologue constantly circled back to legacy, continuity, and the importance of strong bloodlines. She talked about grandchildren with a fervor that was unnerving, pointing to specific, dusty rooms in the house that would be perfect for the nursery or a wonderful playroom. Dave and his father spent the entire morning outside, engaged in the seemingly endless task of chopping wood. The rhythmic, percussive sound of the axe was the soundtrack to my confinement indoors. I watched them from the window, two figures moving in a silent, coordinated dance of labor. They didn't talk. They just worked, a united front against the outside world. During a rare, precious moment when Eleanor was occupied in the kitchen, I slipped away, seeking a respite from the oppressive atmosphere. I found myself in a small, cluttered study I hadn't seen before. Bookshelves bowed under the weight of old, leather-bound volumes. On a large, scarred oak desk sat an enormous family Bible, its cover worn and cracked with age. Driven by a curiosity I couldn't suppress, I opened it. The pages were filled with elegant, old-fashioned script, recording generations of births, marriages, and deaths, the Anderson lineage. And then, tucked between the pages of the book of Jeremiah, I found it. It was a brittle, yellowed newspaper clipping from the Bangor Daily News, dated 8 years ago. The paper felt like dry leaves in my hands. The headline was stark and brutal. Local woman missing, foul play suspected. The article detailed the disappearance of a woman named Isabel Reynolds, a 28-year-old talented painter described as vibrant and beloved. She had been in a serious, long-term relationship with a local man, David Anderson, for over 3 years. She had last been seen after a family dinner at the Anderson home. She never made it back to her apartment. Her car was found a week later, abandoned deep in a state park, her purse, wallet, and phone still inside. There were no signs of a struggle. The investigation had focused heavily on her boyfriend, David, and his family, but with no body, no forensic evidence, and a tightly closed ranks mentality from the locals, the case had grown cold and was eventually relegated to a back drawer. My heart hammered against my ribs so violently I felt dizzy. Isabel, Annabelle, the intense, almost frantic focus on me. The constant comments about not giving up, about sticking together no matter what. The gap in the family photographs that perfectly coincided with his relationship with her. It wasn't just eccentricity. It was something dark, something pathological. They weren't just a private family. They were a fortress guarding a terrible secret, and I was being groomed to become a permanent part of it. I heard a floorboard creak behind me. My blood turned to ice. I shoved the clipping deep into the pocket of my jeans and turned, trying to school my features into something neutral. Robert was standing in the doorway, his massive frame blocking the light from the hall. His arms were crossed, his expression unreadable. "Find anything interesting in here?" he asked, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that seemed to vibrate in the quiet room. "Just admiring the Bible," I stammered, my voice trembling despite my best efforts. "It's a beautiful book." He took a step into the room, his eyes scanning the desk, then settling back on me. He smiled, a thin, humorless stretch of his lips that revealed nothing. "It holds all our family's history, all our secrets." He paused, letting the word secrets hang in the air between us. Best to leave them where they lie. I couldn't sleep that night. Every creak of the old house was a footstep. Every moan of the wind a whisper. The memory of Isabel's face from the newspaper article, a grainy photo of a smiling young woman with dark hair, was burned onto the back of my eyelids. I lay rigid in the bed next to David, feeling a chasm between us that was now miles wide and bottomless. The man I loved was a stranger, connected to a tragedy he had never once mentioned. The next morning, I fabricated a work emergency, my voice shaking as I told David I needed to get back to Seattle immediately. I couldn't spend another hour under that roof. His reaction was instantaneous and volcanic. All the placid calm he had maintained evaporated in a heartbeat. "After everything they've done for you," he hissed, his face contorting with a rage I had never witnessed. His voice low so his parents wouldn't hear, but no less venomous for it. "They've opened their home to you. They've accepted you as one of their own. And you want to run off because you're a little uncomfortable? You're so ungrateful. So selfish." The 8-hour drive back to Seattle was a frozen, silent hell. He didn't speak a single word. He turned the music up loud enough to make conversation impossible, his grip on the steering wheel tight enough to turn his knuckles white. Any attempt I made to break the silence was met with a stony glare. The man in the car was not the man I had driven to Maine with. This was a guard, returning a prisoner. When we finally arrived at our condo, the silent treatment solidified into an impenetrable wall of ice. He moved his pillow and blanket into the spare room without a word. He threw away the peace-offering meals I cooked, leaving the full plate in the trash as a deliberate, cruel message. My apologies, my pleas for us to just talk, were met with a look of pure contempt. A week into this emotional torture, feeling like I was losing my mind, I cornered him in the kitchen, blocking the doorway. "David, we have to talk about this. We can't live like this," I said, my voice thick with unshed tears. He didn't just get angry, he transformed. His eyes, usually so warm, turned black with fury. He slammed his hand flat against the wall beside my head, the impact making me flinch and cry out. "You think you can just waltz in, judge my family, and walk away unscathed?" he snarled, his face inches from mine. "You think your little life here is so independent? I brought you into this circle. I vouch for you. Without me, you're nothing here. You'd be designing logos for coffee shops in some nowhere town." This was the moment the last veil fell away. My fear was suddenly eclipsed by a clear, cold certainty. My work visa is sponsored by my company, David. My own talent and qualifications got me here. I have my own bank account, my own career, my own friends. You didn't bring me anywhere. I walked here on my own 2 feet. Seeing that line of attack fail, he switched tactics with a whiplash-inducing speed, his anger twisting into something uglier. Paranoid accusation. "Is there someone else? Is that it? That project manager. Ben, you're always laughing with during your Zoom calls? You're trying to find an excuse to run off, just like you always do when things get real. You're a quitter." It was so bizarre, so baseless. It was almost laughable. He was projecting his own history onto me. He demanded my phone, his hand outstretched, his eyes wild. Numbly, I handed it over. He spent nearly an hour scouring my texts, emails, photos, and social media, searching for evidence of betrayal that existed only in his mind. Finding nothing but the mundane reality of my life, he didn't apologize. He just stared at me, his expression a terrifying mix of disappointment and pure, unadulterated hatred. "I need to rethink everything about us," he said coldly, and stormed out of the condo, slamming the door so hard the pictures on the wall rattled. That was the final push I needed. The last thread of hope that this could be fixed snapped. While he was gone, the silence in the condo was no longer oppressive. It was liberating. I acted with clarity and purpose I hadn't felt in weeks. I went to my laptop and did what I should have done the moment I read that clipping. I researched Isabel Reynolds. The articles were all there, painting a picture of a vibrant, talented young woman who had vanished into thin air. The common, ominous thread in every story was David Anderson and his close-knit, private family. I called my older sister, Clara, in Portland. I didn't sugarcoat it. I told her about the family, the clipping, the rage, the accusations. She listened without interruption, and when I finished, Her voice was firm and steady. "Pack a bag. I'm on the next flight. You're not staying there another night." While I waited, I packed a single suitcase with my passport, financial documents, essential electronics, and a few changes of clothes. I didn't take the jewelry he'd given me or the silly, sentimental gifts. They felt tainted. I just needed to be gone. When David returned hours later, I was waiting by the door, my suitcase at my feet, my coat on. His eyes went from the suitcase to my face, and his expression cycled through shock, anger, and then settled into a terrifying, calculated calm. "I'm leaving," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. He didn't try to stop me. He just smiled, that same thin, humorless smile his father had given me in the study. "If you walk out that door, Anna, don't you ever think about coming back. You are throwing away 4 years. You are throwing us away. You will regret this. I'll make sure of it." The chill in his voice was more frightening than his shouted rage had been. "I'm sure you will," I replied, and I walked out, the sound of the door closing behind me feeling like the closing of a tomb. I stayed with Clara in Portland for a week. The digital harassment started almost immediately. The text cycled through manipulative pleas. "You're breaking my mother's heart. She already thinks of you as a daughter," to venomous insults. "You're a cold, fragile bitch. No one will ever put up with you like I did," to vague, sinister threats. "The world isn't as safe as you think, Anna. I hope you feel safe wherever you end up." I saved everyone. I blocked his number, but he used different texting apps, a new number appearing every few days. Then his mother started calling. Isabel was troubled. Annabelle. Eleanor's voice whispered on my voicemail, smooth as silk. She wasn't strong enough for our family. She wasn't loyal. "But you are. You're the one we've been waiting for. Come home, dear. Let us take care of you. We can fix this." It was a final, horrifying confirmation. They weren't just a weird family. They were a predatory system, and I had been their chosen replacement, their attempt to overwrite a terrible memory. Isabel hadn't been troubled. She had been erased. With Clara's unwavering support and a loan from my parents, I hired a lawyer to handle the unwinding of our shared assets, the condo, the joint bank account. It was a draining, bureaucratic process, but with each signed document, I felt a little more of myself return. I found a short-term rental in a building with a 24-hour doorman and excellent security in Boston. I officially transferred to my company's Boston office, citing personal reasons. I never told David where I was going. My lawyer became the only point of contact. The fear began to recede, replaced by a solid, unwavering anger. I had lost my home, my relationship, and my trust in my own judgment, but I had reclaimed my life. 6 months after I left, I received a certified letter from a law firm in Maine. Robert Anderson had passed away unexpectedly from a heart attack. David, as the sole heir, was relinquishing his life in Seattle and moving back to the family property permanently. The letter was a dry, legal formality related to the final dissolution of our shared property. There was no personal message from him. It was over. I live in Boston now. I have a new apartment with large, south-facing windows that let in the morning light. I've started dating again, cautiously, my instincts now honed to a razor's edge. Sometimes when my phone rings from an unknown number, my heart still skips a beat, but the fear no longer controls me. I don't know what happened to Isabel Reynolds. I think of her often, and I pray that one day her family gets the answers and the justice they deserve. But I do know this. The Anderson family's legacy of silence and secrets almost consumed me too. I escaped not because I was exceptionally brave, but because a brittle piece of newspaper and my own screaming, primal instincts told me to run. And for once in my life, I didn't stop to look back.